CBC investigation is raising further questions about just how Airbnb guests are protected. A couple of months ago, Airbnb froze the account of one of its top Canadian hosts. There had been multiple complaints from guests about horrible conditions, but people who'd booked before the suspension were never notified. In studio with me this morning, Valérie Ouellette, who's been investigating. We've been hearing from a lot of people very interested in your story this morning, Valérie. So tell us more about these additional bookings here.
Well, you remember in the spring we wanted to find Airbnb's biggest players in Canada.
Yes.
And that's how we found AJ. So AJ came up because he owned more than 90 listings. They were all in Montreal. And at that point, we didn't think much of it. He was a super host. He had a lot of really good reviews. But it appears that that now went sideways. His rentals are now into disarray. We are hearing from a growing number of clients who have had really bad experiences. We're talking about dirty properties, unsafe properties. We're talking about clients who show up at the door and message him and never hear from him. So they're in a new city, they have nowhere to stay, and they're desperate. And that has been reflected on AJ's profile page. The issue is Airbnb decided to block him from taking further listings, but they did not tell everyone who had pending bookings with him. And we're at a high touristic season, so we're talking about a lot, hundreds of people, and many tell us they've never been told about it.
So, okay, so they just didn't know, and they proceeded and just had some nightmare scenarios as we've been broadcasting this morning. As you say, focused on Montreal. High tourist season, Montreal is a big tourist community. What's the response there?
We'll focus on Montreal. So we took this to the Montreal mayor, Valérie Plante. We showed her pictures from these dirty properties. We showed her the bad reviews, and she had a very strong reaction. She was very angry. She says it's more than time for Airbnb to step up its game, especially when it comes to monitoring potentially problematic hosts like this one and telling clients about it. Here's what she had to say.
Imagine yourself, maybe with your family or by yourself, traveling. You get here, you're looking for your fantastic place to stay, and then, or it doesn't exist, or it's not even clean. And so it does have an impact.
And so the Montreal mayor is saying that this does have an impact on the reputation of the city, because the least tourists can expect when they show up in a new place is to have a roof over their head and to stay in amenities that are clean. Now, she says that new rules who are in place in Quebec, who are going to come into effect in the next few weeks, might help with that. AJ and others like him would have to formally register as touristic operators, and they would have to deal with the accountability that comes with that.
Right, just before I let you go, we should probably make it clear you did reach out to Airbnb. What do they say about this for your story?
Well, Airbnb says that it monitors both reviews and hosts and guests, and they were also saying that they will refund everyone who has pending bookings. We have to mention, too, that they did shut down the account, both AJ's account and all the duplicate accounts that have popped up after he was forbidden from taking new listings.
Okay. Valérie, thank you very much for coming in for more on that. Now, we've been focusing on the AJ story, but as we've been hearing from you all morning, there are many Airbnb horror stories shared by people like Linda in Whitby, Ontario. Take a look at this, that she booked an Airbnb in Paris a few years back. 10 days prior to arriving, she tried to reach the host to finalize things. No reply. So she contacted corporate offices, and 3 days later finally got back to her to say the host had decided to cancel. Wasn't convenient to rent at that time. Now she wonders what might have happened if she had not asked. She would have been stranded there. Marta writing in as well about her terrible experience in her view with Airbnb in Vancouver back in February. They really need to tighten up their policies, her estimation. In her letter, she gives us the details of her experience, says she was virtually unable to communicate with the listings host, that she was locked out when she got there, unable to contact the company, and she later noticed similar negative reviews that appeared after she had booked. So again, similar circumstances to what some of the AJ booking have been the case. The listings remained up even after her own experience. Her emailed complaint went unanswered. So those are just some of the stories. We'd love to hear from you today. And again, here's how you can reach us, as always, at CBC Morning Live or Morning Live at CBC.ca. One of our top stories this morning has been a CBC News investigation raising new questions about how well Airbnb protects its guests. And it focuses on the growing number of complaints against the company. People who say they've been inconvenienced, left in the dark, left in the lurch, no choice but to stay in dirty homes that perhaps they would not have chosen and that definitely did not come as advertised. We've had a lot of responses from you, and thank you for sharing your horror stories. Mario seems to be one that we should bring to your attention again. He booked an Airbnb stay in Prague, and the place, as you see in these side-by-side pictures, nothing like what was advertised. On the left, what Airbnb posted. On the right, the pictures that Mario took. He says the place was terrible and dirty, but he had nowhere else to stay, and so he had no choice. This was his first experience with Airbnb, most likely his last. Now, again, thanks for your responses. We don't know exactly who was the host of that particular property, but what this most recent story has been focusing on, as I said, mega hosts or super hosts, as they're known specifically for Airbnb. Some say that they have turned what was once mom and pop business model into what is a shoddy hotel-like enterprise. What does it mean for the industry, for the customers? Let's talk about this with Professor David Wachsmuth, who is the Canadian Research Chair in Urban Governance at McGill University. He has looked at Airbnb for years. He's the man to talk to on this. So, Professor Wachsmuth, thank you for coming in and talking to us today.
My pleasure.
So, AJ, if you've been watching our coverage this morning, we've been talking about AJ with 90 properties, one of, if not the largest host in Canada until he was shut down. And you might think that's a specific case, but then our investigation's shown that 44% of Airbnb hosts have at least 2 properties, nearly a quarter have at least 5. How common are these mega hosts, these super hosts?
They're extremely common and getting more common every day. And to be honest, these numbers actually understate it because so many of the huge commercial operators on Airbnb run many different accounts to kind of split up their listings, even though there's just one company behind the whole enterprise.
So then what kind of problems specifically are these super hosts causing?
Well, the basic issue is, and this is what our research has found, is that small home sharers, casual, you've got a spare bedroom or you're away for the weekend, have very different actions that they take on the platform when you compare them with big commercial operators. If you've just got a spare bedroom, you really want to make sure it's a nice listing, that you get people coming that are going to enjoy their time because you're going to be interacting with them. Big commercial operators, the thing they care about is getting as many bodies into beds as many nights of the year as possible. And so that means they're going to cut corners whenever cutting corners is going to make them more money, and that's exactly what we're seeing.
So they don't care about a nice review and customer service to get people talking about how nice their stay was. They just want numbers.
Well, if you think about it, for example, if you have 200 guests coming a year to your property, you could meet 200 guests, 200 nights, and hand them the key, or you could set up an automated service. The automated service is going to save you a lot of money, and even if it causes a few hassles and you get a few bad reviews, that's a price worth paying if you get to save all that money and earn a lot more profit as a result.
Okay. We talked, AJ, this whole story has been focused on Montreal. We should understand this morning, is this just a Montreal thing or problem?
I would say it's worse in Montreal, but it's certainly not limited to this city. Montreal's got the largest concentration of big Airbnb commercial operators of any of the big cities in Canada. But everywhere you look across the country, you're going to see a very similar phenomenon, which is commercial operators who are running de facto hotels out of apartment buildings, and they're really focused on cutting costs and looking after their bottom line.
In this particular story, we learned from our reporting, Airbnb suspended the account, blocked new listings, but didn't stop properties from being posted under a different name. What is the company doing on this point to protect customers?
I think expecting Airbnb to be really aggressive in how it's protecting customers here is like expecting the fox to be really aggressive in guarding the hen house. Airbnb has the exact same incentives as AJ or any other large commercial operator because commercial operators are where Airbnb makes its money. So they have no interest in shutting these places down for good. They're going to respond to PR situations, but they're going to be very happy for all those listings to get right back on their platform as soon as possible because that's how they make their money.
That's really interesting because when our news crew got involved, of course, things changed and there was talk of refund and again, shutting things down. What could the company be doing more effectively to protect its customers?
Well, one thing we know is that over time, the number of reviews that have been left on Airbnb has been declining. And our suspicion as well is that Airbnb is prioritizing those reviews a little bit less in terms of when they decide to show you a listing or a different listing. If they really wanted to make sure that customers weren't getting tricked into kind of shoddy arrangements, they would make sure that hosts are penalized pretty strongly for bad reviews, and particularly if there are any situations where there's a kind of misleading listing where the photos don't match. Airbnb, if they wanted to, they could certainly penalize hosts more for those kinds of violations. It's just that, frankly, they don't want to.
Do they need to? I'm wondering if they ignore this at their peril and the very business model might be at risk at all.
Well, I think that if you look back a few years to when Airbnb was much more about home sharing and a kind of, more intimate experience between guests and hosts, I think this would be a real problem. But right now, the Airbnb platform is a platform for big commercial operators to run kind of cut-rate hotels, basically. So this is exactly how the business model is operating right now. I think it would be better if it were different, but I think Airbnb's decided that this is the way that they're going to make the most money, and so this is the way that they're going to run their business.
Given that reality, can you share some advice this morning? What are warning signs for people to say, oh, I shouldn't stay there, and conversely, this does in fact look good and I'm going to give it a try?
I think you really have to pay attention to those ratings, and particularly read the actual text of the reviews, because in all the cases that we've looked at, if a listing has 0 reviews, stay away from it, and if it has a bunch of reviews, if you read through them, you'll get a pretty good sense of what's actually happening in that apartment.
Okay. Thanks so much. I really enjoyed this, and you've shared some great information. I think we'll be talking again, I would imagine, about this. Not a story that's going away. Appreciate it, Professor.
Okay, take care.
David Wachsmuth is the Canadian Research Chair in Urban Governance at McGill University. He is in Montreal this morning. You can read more about this CBC News investigation on Airbnb. As we mentioned, it's been centering on this superhost AJ, who was at the time one of, if not the largest host in the country. It's up on the front page of CBCNews.ca for full information. This is CBC News Network.